to another episode of the Mental Health Movement podcast, Voice for the Voiceless. I am your host, Chris. Today we have a special guest. She is an Indigenous Medicine Woman, and I believe you're based out of Canada, right?
Yes, I am in Calgary, Alberta.
Awesome. And we're just gonna, cover Suicide Prevention Month, just like the last couple episodes, and just kind of pick her brain because I thought all the content that you covered, Reese, was very interesting, and I wanted to get your thoughts on a lot of them and just see how this journey began for you. So thank you so much for being on today.
Oh, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
You're so welcome. So let me start off with the easiest question to ask, just for the subject matter. What does Suicide Prevention Month mean to you?
To me, it means bringing a much needed awareness to everyone on such a hot topic that holds so much shame to it, when really, in reality, most, if not all people in life experience suicidal ideation or those dark thoughts at one point or another in their life.
Couldn't agree more. I feel like, every time this subject comes up, whether it's among a group of friends or just, some like random person on a TikTok post, it just always feels like, like you said, there's that big black cloud, that shame that comes along with talking about suicide. And I feel like one of the biggest problems with social media is, making trauma a competition. Instead of like lifting each other up, it's like, oh, well, I sprained my ankle, you broke your leg. Your pain is more than mine, or my pain is more than yours. And I just kind of feel like sometimes we go backwards more than we spread awareness for it.
I have to agree with you. And that's even in like a therapy chair. I have clients that know my story and have read my books, and they will say, "Well, Reese, you've been through more." I'm like, "Yes, but that doesn't take away from the fact that your experience was equally traumatic for you." Those of us as on the clinical side, we're not sitting there judging you. We just want to help
Right.
because it's not a competition. Yes, it might help that I've been through worse, but I'm not sitting here keeping score.
Right. And I spoke about this with another therapist that I had on as a guest, where she's like, people forget that therapists are people too. It's yeah, they may or may not have been through worse than what you're going through, but like you said, it doesn't devalue anything that you went through, because everybody's experience is their own. And when I first went to therapy when I lived in New Jersey, she really worked with patients that were like victims of like sex trafficking and stuff, and a lot of those were younger clients. And when I went in there first session, I couldn't look at her in the eyes because I was just so upset. I was devaluing my experience because I'm like, damn, maybe what I went through wasn't as bad because I didn't have to go through that. And like you said, nobody's keeping score. Nobody's saying, oh well, you haven't gone through this, so your life isn't that bad. And again, going back to what we started with, it's not a competition, nor should it be treated like one.
Right? Well, and in reality, I don't want anyone to go through what I went through.
Right.
I'm sitting there hoping that clients haven't experienced like a tenth of what I have,
Right.
because I know like it's that much harder to come back from.
Yeah.
And also like their suicide risks are going to be that much higher. Right? Yes, I have a background like working with high risk youth particularly. And I know they're like broken little firecrackers that you just have to nurture and hope that you say the right words for the individual to keep them here for another day.
Yeah, absolutely. I came across a video on TikTok yesterday where a guy was talking about this little girl, 11 years old. She got bullied heavily, and she posted a suicide note on YouTube. And I almost didn't listen to it because I was just like, this is gonna be rough. Like, I don't know if I can hear a little girl's voice and hear that pain. And like listening to her tell people like don't be mean to others and don't bully anybody and just be yourself. And it's just like 11-year-old girl being wiser than some 50-year-old, 60-year-old people is crazy because it's just like bullying is probably one of the worst things in this community. And I feel 2023 is a lot worse than it was in 1980 when it comes to bullying. Obviously I wasn't born in the 80s. I didn't experience that. And I'm sure the bullying was more on the physical side, but I feel like cyberbullying is a whole nother extreme.
It's relentless. It's a little psychotic. You'll block the bully, and then they'll just create a new account, and they keep going, and then it's not just bullying, it's harassment. It's way more on the mental side now
Yeah.
than I would rather get beat up. Like
Yeah. No,
that's
I
not promoting violence, not promoting violence at all. I would rather get beat up.
I completely agree. Because it's just, back then it was just okay, if you stood up to the bully, you swing at him 9 times out of 10, they're not gonna come back for you, and nowadays, like you said, you create new accounts. So I think I've told this story couple like maybe last year when it happened. So I'm really big into the wrestling community. I've been a wrestling fan since I was like 7 years old. And I'm very opinionated when it comes to wrestling because I'm passionate about it. And sometimes that brings in trolls that I just don't agree. It got to a point where they were targeting my family, including my deceased brother. And it got to a point where I had to call the cops, like, the non-emergency line. And I'm like, hey, like, something needs to be done. Like, this is insane. Oh, well, unless they physically do something, we can't do anything. I'm like, oh, okay. So that's a great preventative measure. Um, I feel like there's not enough channels for people to go through that are getting cyberbullying.
No, and that's part of the problem is we've shifted into this world where there's no consequences.
Right.
Like again, back to that older world. Oh, you're being a dick. You're likely to get slapped around
Right.
and learn to not be a dick. Now it's encouraged.
So that kind of brings me to a question that has been thrown around in the community a little bit. And, like you said, I don't provoke violence myself either. Do you think it's a discipline problem among a lot of these kids or, now younger adults? Do you feel that it's a discipline problem?
That's definitely part of the equation.
Because I
Like,
feel like it's a lot of these kids can just pick up a phone and they get tapped on the hand or whatever, they get smacked or whatever, and call the cops and the parents in jail. That's my sister's generation. It's kids are wild.
yeah, I one of my mom's friends has kids younger than me, and that child, being reckless, has had the cops called on mom, who was not doing anything out of hand.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane.
And I couldn't imagine like how different of an environment it is in Canada opposed to here, because I know it's just like they get CPS involved here and just um yeah, I don't know what the solution is at this point because it's just like you can't discipline your kids and they're out of control.
Right? Well, and not even just the kids. Some of these adults need consequences too.
Absolutely.
I've seen some really out of hand things, especially since the pandemic.
Hmm.
Like that global trauma seems to have really impacted everyone, whether they're acknowledging it or not.
Especially from a social standpoint, because I know for me, the first event that I went to when COVID was beginning to end, quote unquote, um, was a concert. And there's like a couple thousand people on this dance floor, and they're like, oh well, you got to wear a mask and everything. I'm like, okay, there's gonna be a lot of bodies like next to each other, and like suffocate there. And I was kind of like at the point, like, if I get sick, at least it'll happen, and whatever, I'll get over it, or whatever the case. And I remember taking off my mask just so I can breathe. I'm just like, this is crazy. Like, I cannot wear a mask at a concert. Like, it's crazy. I was looking around, everybody's still wearing a mask. I'm like, uh-oh, I'm gonna put my mask back on, because I was starting to get anxiety.
Yeah.
Um, but social anxiety is, I feel like, severely increased since the pandemic.
Oh, definitely. I don't remember having social anxiety issues as an adult
Right,
before the pandemic. And now when I go out, like there's that silent worry. Like, yeah, I've already had it twice and I'm vaccinated. Like, sure, I get it again. I'm probably not gonna die.
right.
But there's still that, oh, I could.
That little voice in the back of your head, right? um, so let's talk about your journey, and where you're at now, to the point of being able to help people. So where does your journey begin, and how did it turn into helping other people heal?
Oh, well, I mean, the the mental health issues and the trauma started young. Um, but luckily, I actually started like my own counseling and healing journey at 11.
Wow.
And um, I also started doing my training through Medicine Woman stuff in all of our tribal ways, young as well. But I always maintained more of the mental health and social work side of those things because I also, as a teenager, the first time I had my assist training, which is your suicide intervention training in Canada, I don't know if it's the same in the States. I was 15. I got that at 15 so that I could better help my friends because they were a depressed, suicidal bunch, and I didn't want to lose any of them. And I guess that's where I got lucky because I stuck with it in facilitating groups and eventually finishing my training. And from there, I went and learned every technique that I personally needed to heal because I was having very limited success in overcoming my PTSD and my trauma within like your basic Western practices. And eventually it was mindfulness practices and specific meditation practices that were equivalent to doing psychedelics without the drugs that helped me actually rewire the brain to not just be in a constant trauma state.
Right. I think, for me, when I was 14, that was my first attempt at unaliving myself. And unfortunately, as I've mentioned on a couple previous podcasts, the resources weren't there. You know, it was I had to do outpatient therapy that didn't do anything for me, and it was with a therapist who specialized in gambling addiction. So just to show you where the world was at that time. Fast forward now, being 31, I have been in therapy now 3 years, and in these 3 years, between the podcast and the group that you're a part of as well, there's so many peaks and valleys of this journey. Obviously, as you know, and a lot of awareness and education has helped me get to where I'm at today. I wish more than anything that I could go back to my younger self and tell myself that it's okay what you're going through and you don't have to go through it alone. Because when we're that young and your parents are divorced, you don't have a support system that's very strong, you feel very alone, and thus creating that mindset of, okay, so I'm alone, so nobody's going to care if I'm gone. And unfortunately, I feel like that's the same mindset that a lot of people have, that either aren't open to healing, or aren't open to finding those resources, or are afraid to, because I feel
Mhm.
like there's still that stigma of therapy. Like that post you commented on yesterday. Um, we should normalize the conversation of therapy. We shouldn't be a group of men or women that um, just scold each other or judge each other because somebody's going to therapy. Like, I believe everybody could use therapy in some form or another. Absolutely.
Like we all have things that we need to heal from. So like why are we shaming others for doing so? Like I most of us are not boomers. We
Right.
don't need to sit around and gossip about so and so's divorce that actually has them in complete mental anguish and teetering on the edge. Why don't you support that friend and say, hey, do you need to talk? Do you need resources? I can find them.
And the language part of it is so important, because uh you know when you say that you're here for somebody, there should be a lot to back that up, not just to say it so somebody feels like, okay, cool, somebody's there for me, somebody actually cares about me. Like, language absolutely matters, like finding those resources for people. I've talked down more people than I can think of, and it's one of those things where you feel like you're making a difference, and I'm sure in your practice there's a lot of that feeling too, because you help so many people. Um, and for me, I've volunteered for the crisis text line, and I've dealt with a youth crisis situation, and those are really hard to deal with, because you put yourself in that kid's shoes, and it's just like, man, 12-year-old, 14-year-old kids should not be feeling like this at all. And then it manifests into adulthood, and it gets so much worse, and it messes with your psyche.
Right? Like even the kids in groups that I was dealing with like 5, 6 years ago, they've now aged out as they were teenagers then. And now when they message me and they're still in that same state, I'm just as heightened. I'm like, no, you are still this kid that I worry about, and that's still how I see you. I don't care that it was 11 at night and I was almost asleep. Now we're going to make sure you're okay.
Yeah, and that's another thing. When you say that you're there for somebody who's in a suicidal mentality, and it's just like, obviously not telling people to be there for somebody 24/7, because that's unrealistic. But if you're trying to help somebody, talk them off that metaphoric and literal cliff, um, then it's just like, you have to make sure that you're willing to hold yourself accountable to the point of making sure that they make it to the next day. Everybody, we're all adults, we all are accountable for all our actions, and I feel, if you're trying to be there for somebody, absolutely make sure that you follow through with those words.
Exactly. And, if you have to put parameters on it, like, hey, these are the hours I'm generally sleeping. So make sure that that's stated so that the person knows, okay, maybe this is not the best time to reach out to Chris.
Right. Yeah. Boundaries are absolutely important. And this kind of segues into honoring your inner child too, because you might still have those bruises and cuts from when you were a kid, and listening to this person's story might be very triggering for you. And I know for a really long time, um the words triggered was just social media memes. It was just like, oh well, you're triggered this, you're triggered that. And my brother, before he passed away, he had reached out to me about a friend. He's like, I wanted to genuinely ask you something, because what are triggers? Like, I don't understand what triggers are. Like, I know the haha social media, your trigger thing. Like, that's social media being social media. And I said, well, it's not walking on eggshells, but making sure that you don't step on landmines for people, because
Exactly.
you don't, yeah. Um, but it's making sure that you're not setting somebody off because of people's past trauma. And it's so easy to do that, especially I'm sure in your profession.
Oh yeah.
What steps do you take? Like, say if you unintentionally, I guess, trigger somebody, because I know, I'm sure being a therapist, uh, you don't intentionally hit triggers. But what are your steps to taking if you accidentally trigger somebody? Like, do you just get them off of that ledge and try and talk them down, kind of thing?
Yeah, I always immediately slip into like comfort mode. Like try and talk them down, like remind them of like breathing techniques and various techniques that will help them ground and bring them back to the present moment. Because yeah, like those triggers, they're always accidental. And we are always anticipating them in those chairs because I'm most often working with trauma.
Right.
But at the same time, like there's always that brief panic depending on the level of the trigger. Because, some of them are okay, I just need to breathe. And others are, okay, we have to pause. We need to take a break, comfort, like warm beverage or cold beverage, depending, because not all people find warm comforting. I'm a person that is comforted by cold, which is weird. I don't know. It might be a
I'm the
Canadian.
same way. I
Like
gotta have cold. I can't do hot.
like soft things but cold things.
Right. Like,
But the
I
thing
live in
is,
Florida, so I have enough heat here.
yeah, you need cold. But it's always a balancing act
Right.
because you want to talk the person back down, but you don't want to make it seem like you're speaking down to them or belittling or minimizing anything. Like
Yeah.
sometimes they honestly are okay sitting in that trigger.
Yeah.
And like which is part of what we train a person to do. Like sit with it, feel it, let it go. But yes, that is also easier said than done.
Absolutely. And the most important part that you said there is, not minimalizing it, and also letting them feel what they're feeling. Because I feel so many people are always trying to get somebody out of that negative state of mind. It's just like, oh well, I'm here, everything's going to be okay. It's just like, okay, those are great comforting words, but you need to understand somebody's in a crisis. You can't just expect them to climb off that cliff and everything's going to be fine, because it doesn't work that way. Um, when I first created the mental health movement page on Facebook, I was really keen on sharing my story and just, finding the right language and stuff to use in this community, because every day you learn something new, right?
Yeah.
And instead of saying somebody killed himself, somebody unalived themselves. And again, language and terminology is so important in this community, because I feel when you're saying somebody killed himself, it's kind of taking away from how powerful that situation was. It's taking your life is not something easy at all. And so many people that are uninformed to that mentality, it's like, I don't think you realize like how much pain somebody has to go through and somebody has to hold on to want to get to that point. I obviously don't encourage unaliving at all. It's very serious. And uh people that are just getting into this journey of healing, you got to make sure that you're willing to always listen to everybody's perspective and listening to how people heal from certain things, because how I heal and how you heal might be two completely different ways, and there's no wrong way to do it. um I remember making a post in the group, like when the group was first formed. It was a gentleman sharing his story about his son unaliving himself, and it was very graphic. It was very detailed on how it happened because it's a father grieving a loss of a son, and somebody had messaged me like, "Hey, just letting you know, I had to take a break from the page because that was a very triggering post for me." And this is the very early stages of when I was starting my journey, and I didn't really understand what triggers were. And she said, "Can you please put trigger warning on a post like that in the future because that was really hard for me to read. It was a raw post, and it was something that shouldn't be put out there without a warning." And I'm like, okay. So I did my research and understand a lot more what triggers are because I had triggers myself that I didn't know existed. Um, and I just, like you said, I feel the most important part is grounding people when you do hit those landmines and uh, talk them down the best to your ability because there's no wrong way to talk somebody down. It's just you got to be careful how you word things.
Well, and this isn't an always thing, but most people, whether it's a trigger or whether they're in that space and thinking about completing, most of them just need to be heard and felt
Absolutely.
seen. Like most of them just need someone to genuinely sit down and listen. And I have to say, like that's the beautiful part of it. Yes, it's high endorphin, and it's always a little nerve-wracking because you never know how it will go. But once you get a person to, hey, I'm okay, I'm gonna go to bed. Like
And I
that's
feel
the rewarding part of, oh, okay, good. They're here for
I
another.
always feel like uh when it comes to the conversation of suicide, I feel there's a really big misconception when it comes to suicidal ideologies where people are like, "Oh, well, they always talked about taking their life." I'm like, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but most people that are going to take their life don't talk about it. Obviously not saying there aren't people who have said they're going to do it, but 9 times out of 10, I feel like it's fair to say that they don't talk about it. If they
No,
know they're going to do it, they're going to do it.
and exactly people that are actually have the plan and they're ready to do it, they're not making that call.
Yeah.
And
And
honestly, that's why everyone needs basic intervention training because
right.
there are so many signs that someone is in like the depths of depression and in that space.
And those signs speak so loud too, being at the point of where I am and what I've experienced myself and know those signs, it's just like, you don't joke about saying you're gonna unalive yourself. There's so many people just in social media in general that say, "Oh, well, I'm gonna do this." I'm like, okay, like, do you really mean that? Because I'm here to help you. We can call a crisis hotline together. Whatever you need. Um, and it's just like it keeps that stigma over the conversation of suicide, and it makes this journey so much harder than it needs to be to get that word out, to get that awareness out.
Yeah,
Um,
I completely agree.
so alluding back to what you had mentioned towards the beginning of the podcast, you had mentioned that you had wrote books. Um, both of them entitled, they were published under the Paralysis Series, Beating the Odds, and Paralysis Too, Hot Takes and Self Empowerment. What made you want to get into writing those books?
Honestly, I needed to tell my story. I both like the first one, I didn't I wasn't even sure I would publish it. I just needed to write it to write it. And that one is more the recovery. Yes, I talk about the experiences like mentally and the experiences as someone living life while um, overcoming paralysis. But book two gets spicy. It talks about everything else. from the underage sex work to really different things that are going on in our present society that we could really change. Like, you could consider my second book a feminist manifesto of the world we live in today.
Right. And how long did it take you to write the first book? Because I know you said you didn't really plan on publishing it, but you wanted to share your story. How long did it take you, and what made you want to put it out there?
The writing itself on the last first draft, I would say from start to finish before editing, I did it in like 2 months.
Wow. And you just basically wanted to get your story out there because you felt like a lot of people could both hear you out and also, maybe look at themselves and like, hey, maybe I should talk to somebody and not go through what Reese had to go through kind of situation, right?
Well, yeah, and really empowering people to remember, like, if you put your mind to something, you can do it.
Yeah.
You might need to find adequate support and, some good outlets, but anything you want to do in this life, you can do. It's just time and effort.
Yeah. And so outside of your line of work and what you do to help other people, what are some ways that you practice self-care? Like what helps you decompress? What helps you, be become whole again for the next day?
Exercising daily or as close to daily as possible.
Right.
Um, Creative outlets, like I'm a musician, I play guitar, as well as a few others, but those are not here with me. Any and like visual arts, but I would say exercise and really like taking care of what you need. If you hate cooking every day, meal prep, freeze it, take it out when you need it. Like, cook once a week. And yes, it's boring if that's what you have to do, but
Right.
if that's what you need to do to eat in the depths of your depression, then please do it.
And it's it's so important to practice that self-care too. I feel a lot of people don't appreciate what it means to practice self-care, because especially I feel like especially parents, obviously, your kids are going to come first. Most people put their kids first, but sometimes you got to put yourself first too. It's there's nothing wrong with taking a nap, obviously finding someone to help watch your kids or help you with the kids for like an hour or two, take a nap. I feel journaling helps me a lot, kind of like with your book, you didn't plan on releasing it, and you did to both help yourself and help anybody else who's going through it. Um, when I talk to friends about journaling, it's just kind of like, oh, well, I don't want to write in a diary, it's nothing like that. I'm like, I don't think you realize, like, people underestimate how powerful it is to write words on a piece of paper when it's your thoughts in your head. Because I always equivalent to it, to getting demons off your back and putting them on a piece of paper. It's like, this is what I'm going through, and this is how uh, I'm healing. My therapist came up with a homework assignment for me a couple months ago called the Compassionate Observer. Basically what it is I'll write in two voices. I'll write the negative voice, what's in my head and what I'm going through, and I'll counteract it with the compassionate observer, and try to make sense of those feelings. It helps me so much. And the second time that I wrote down, I started saying I love you to myself, because most people don't start in the mirror every single day and say that they love themselves. And that's something I feel many of us in today's society are missing, is self-love. Because
I that
you look
is
at yourself in the mirror, and sometimes you don't like what you see in the reflection, And like you said, it's up to us to hold ourselves accountable and make those changes and, apply ourselves to what we want in this life.
And exactly, it's that self-accountability. Like if if seeing your alarm go off in the morning is something that makes you dread life, change the name of the alarm if your phone allows you to do that. Make it a kind message to yourself so that's the first thing you see in a day.
I like that. My phone reads my alarm clock names, and sometimes it's like, get up, assholes.
Right, right. Like that's what I used to do. And especially in college when I never got enough sleep, so I was
Right.
always super mad about it going off. Just get up, fucker. And now it's I love you. Go make $1 million.
That's a good manifestation.
It's like okay, I'm being called out, but maybe I'm being kind to myself today, maybe.
Right. Um, I definitely think affirmations are very important, and I actually, the alarm clock name is one of those like low key, like really brilliant things to do because, uh, especially during the pandemic when we were all working from home. Like I still work from home and only go to the office 2 days a week sometimes, and being isolated and being alone all the time, we forget how important that positive self talk and those self affirmations are. So I'm going to change my alarm clock names tonight. um, so you have a few projects on your website, basically all under, Bliss Audit, Blisses, which is a Facebook group, Possibility of Bliss. What are your intentions with these projects, and how beneficial have you found it to be for the community you support?
Well, the possibility of bliss is a mini audio series that entails two different TED Talks I found insanely inspiring on tough days. And in the middle of that, there's one day where I send you a audio love letter from me. That is intended for people in their darkest moments to hopefully get some inspiration and to hopefully like either reach out or to just feel better for the day. Um, that links to my email list, which includes the weekly series of events I run in Bliss, as well as the monthly event I just started where I bring in other BIPOC women and we talk about our experiences to healing and what really made a difference in those. It might morph into a podcast one day, but at this point, it's more of like a community chat. I only recently started the community, so that's actually a shift for me, but generally aimed at other BIPOC women, but as long as someone is respectful and not blatantly racist, they can be there as well.
Right.
Right? It's ultimately it's my women's group.
Nice. I feel it's so important. It's great to hear that you're passionate about what you do because, I've mentioned this in previous podcasts and on others. There's too many people in this community that just look for how much money they can make doing this. What they can do to benefit themselves, as a therapist or as a social worker, whatever it is. There aren't enough people who are willing to, I don't want to say going out of their way because it's nothing like that, but extending yourself for other people, sending that audio note to your followers, to your supporters, I think is one of the greatest ways to reach people because, in social media, everything's visual, everything's audio, and being able to add to that, stimulation of, somebody actually cares about me and hearing those affirmations, um, is it's refreshing to hear somebody, whether it's my therapist or somebody else's therapist or yourself, that are passionate enough to extend a piece of yourself, a piece of your healing journey to help others heal, because more people need to hear that they're enough. More people need to know that they're worthy of so much good in this life in such an evil world.
Hmm.
There's more darkness in this world than there is light, but there's people like you and myself that try our hardest to extend that light to other people. So thank you for sharing that part of it with us, because it's super important that you get your message out there and that you help others heal. Now, as for the podcast comment that you made, I love that you're starting to extend yourself in another direction too, where you have that community chat. I think is great. If you do end up starting that podcast, um, do let me know. I will do my best to help you share it, and feel free to share it in the group as well. More than welcome. You're a family member just like anybody else, so I do appreciate everything that you do. Of
Thank you so much.
course. So what inspired the concept of I'm going to butcher this word. I butcher it every time. In indigenous, right? Is that how you say it? Indigenous
Yep.
trauma counseling. What inspired the concept of indigenous trauma counseling for you?
It's bringing back the traditional ways of healing into a mix of our like westernized practices, because for me, I spent 13 years in and out of counseling. Is that where I actually saw long-lasting results? No, because most of westernized counseling, they give you a booklet, you complete said booklet, magically you are not healed.
Right.
Surprise, surprise. And yet my clients, when I run them through meditations, talk therapy, music therapy if needed, um, and everything else that we will try, I don't have a failure rate, because it's bringing you to what you need. And I wouldn't say I specifically use the Indigenous medicine wheel, but like the concepts of actually dealing with all quadrants of your life, like the mental, the physical, the spiritual, and making sure that you're okay in each quadrant. Because if you're not, like, yes, it might be your mental health that is feeling the pull, but it could be your physical health, or a lack of spiritual wellness that is causing it. It might not be related, and it's often not.
Right.
It's always other circumstances.
I think my favorite part of this community, when it comes to like the professionals and like yourself, who have specialized in this field, my favorite part is just how many different uh perspectives and how many different ways there are that people use to help others heal. Like I've had spiritual healers on here. I've had people who use just natural medicines and stuff to help other people, and it's always interesting to hear just how many different ways there are to help people heal. And like you said, you spent 13 years in and out of counseling, and it's just like, oh, here's a booklet, and you're pressing restart every single new counselor that you meet. And it's always hard to find somebody who's willing to help you on every level of healing. It's people have that misunderstanding of therapy where it's just like, oh, well, it's just a place to vent. It's not, though. Like, if you find the right person, like yourself, you hit every level. And, like my therapist, she's hit every level for me too. And um, therapy is not for everybody. And I will make that as clear as I can for anybody who listens to these podcasts, because it takes so much work to
And
want to be willing to heal.
95% of that work is done outside of that room.
Exactly. Like, the people that are prescribed medicine, I'm not, I myself, I'm not big on medicine. I don't want to take meds. I don't feel the need to take meds, but there are people that genuinely need it.
Yeah.
Um, Now, the problem with that is that medicine is there to help you get through every day, right? But if you're not talking about what you need to go through, you're just depending on medicine to get you through every single day. And like you said, the work starts outside of that room. And that's what a lot of people don't really understand. It's like, oh, well, they prescribe me X amount of milligrams of this and I feel better every day. I'm like, okay, but how are you feeling spiritually, emotionally? Like, you have your off days still? You need to start talking about that. And I would rather go a natural route opposed to, being prescribed something from big pharma because, it's a lot of therapists just get paid to prescribe people, and that's the unfortunate reality of this society.
Exactly. Like even when I'm working with someone that has experienced chronic pain like myself, we're gonna talk about their diet and like different herbs that they can implement to their diet before I'm gonna say, hey, go see a Western physician, please. Like let's cross every other thing off the list first because ultimately Western medicine has just turned into surgery or a band-aid solution.
Absolutely. Um, when I tore my shoulder in 2016, I remember going to the doctor and getting it looked at. We did MRIs, we did X-rays, we couldn't find what was going on. My whole arm I couldn't move it at all, right? First thing he says, we can rehab it or we can get you medicine or we can do surgery. And I told him, I said, honestly, I don't want medicine. Like, absolutely not. You're not getting me hooked on painkillers. Um, and then the rehab thing, I'm like, yeah, I could do rehab. It'll be a longer process, but I don't want to do that. And I said, can we just do the surgery? Like, it's really bad. Like, I cannot move my arm.
Yeah.
So we got the surgery done. When I was getting my stitches removed, he showed me a picture of how bad I tore it. It basically looked like it was the muscles in a blender, right? And he's like, be glad that you got this surgery. I'm like, I'm not stupid, dude. Like, I'm not gonna get pills just because you tell me that pills will make it feel better. Um, One quote that I will forever remember, and it was one of my guests, Sydney. She was the natural. She's all natural medicine and stuff that helps her clients with. Um, they want to treat the symptom and not the cause, and that's modern day medicine. Unfortunately, they don't want to treat the root cause of your trauma. It's like, oh, well, you're feeling depressed here. I'm going to prescribe you this. Oh, you got anxiety? Let me give you this. And it's just like, at what point do we finally say enough is enough and just slowly push the conversation of medicine away? Because my mom has been prescribed Xanax since she was a kid. And the second she stops taking it, her anxiety is like out of control. Like, it's really bad. And again, it's that generation of people, she's almost 50. So, that generation was, don't go to therapy because if you go to therapy, you're crazy. And, oh, you have a shrink. Oh, well, then we got to stay away from you. You're a nut job kind of thing. And I remember when she stopped taking her antidepressants, when she started trying to go to therapy, she stopped taking them for like a day. I think this was like maybe 6 months after she started them. And she just stopped like cold turkey for like 3 days, started hallucinating, started like off the wall, like bad. And I told her, my mom, you cannot just stop taking your medicine like that. Like, you will die. Um,
Yeah.
and I was trying to get her to understand. She's like, I just want to be normal. I'm like, oh, that's that medicine. That's that influence of that medicine in your brain. Like, I hate more than anything in the world that uh prescriptions are so heavy in this community because it makes things so much harder.
Yeah. Well,
And for you, I'm sure it's frustrating because you have clients that may or may not have to take those said medicines.
right. Well, and you see the side effects, and then it's okay. Is this helping more than it's hindering?
Right.
But that's also something I can't say out loud. I just get to sit there and think it while I look pretty.
Right. And it's really hard to have that conversation with some people, because it's just like, oh well, you're judging me because I take medicine. It's like, no, I'm just genuinely trying to help you, and the doctor is telling you that you need to take this medicine, and it's just, again, that conversation is so hard to have with some people because it's like, well, I need to take this medicine or I won't be better. I'm like, that's what they got you believing.
Exactly. Well, and I've
Um,
been to counselors that said, you absolutely need this. When I go on an antidepressant, within 24 hours, I experience serotonin poisoning.
Jesus.
There is no lack of serotonin in my brain. I experience a lack of dopamine.
Right. Oh my God.
My depression is more related to what appears as ADHD.
Right.
It's on the neurodivergent side of things. Like it got worse with the brain injury, but and that's what I've learned. I'm like, oh, I'm having a dark day. Oh, it's too late to take those. Okay, I'm gonna get up early tomorrow and take those.
Right. And I just feel like, when I hear all the side effects of these antidepressants, it infuriates me because it's like, aren't you supposed to like deter suicidal thoughts? Like, why am I taking antidepressants and those suicidal thoughts are there? Like that, why is that even a thing? And
Exactly.
every time I watch TV and I hear about some medicine that's supposed to do this, oh well, side effects may include, and it's like a whole dictionary's worth of side effects. It's like, I'm confused.
Right.
$100 per prescription, and I'm still getting all these side effects. Like, you gotta talk, because this ain't it, boss.
Yeah.
um,
And it's so infuriating because we've gone to one size fits all
right,
when we need to go back to individualized medicine.
absolutely, I agree. Um, to follow up on the indigenous trauma counseling, what does the trauma informed mindfulness entail?
That those are specific, like that's when I'll do the programs with the intense meditations, and I generally do them one-on-one, but I can also do them group session. Um, but that's more the mindfulness. The let me take you on a drug-free meditation quest where we find those loops and in this subconscious state you walk through these different scenarios in their life, whether they be trauma or not, and you come out and there's this intense clarity as we sit there and we debrief because that they've just tapped what's been subconsciously driving them up the wall for however long. And yes, they do need support after that to continue to take, let's say, corrective action.
Mm-hmm.
But I have found these meditations that are equivalent to doing psychedelics doing the most work out of anything.
Would you say the mindfulness session, would you say that's similar to I think it's EMDR, right? Like, it's where
Yes,
you,
that they're comfortable.
okay. So it's like an extension of that. Cool. Um, so the healing circles that you offer in your practice, is it specific survivors, or is it just, all around traumatic experiences? Like,
I would say all in all, like because trauma is trauma. Like
yeah.
if we're having a traumatic response to it, then it was traumatic for you. Um, a lot of the women that do work with me have more of a focus in sexual and domestic trauma, but that's not my like calling of only working with them. I'll work with anyone as long as someone is respectful.
Right. Because I know sometimes, like with like group therapy, I don't know if it's just like some specific topic or if it's just kind of like a group sharing, this is how we're going to heal from it together kind of thing.
Right. Well, and even my weekly session, which is the Survive Hers Guide, it's actually just a group to talk, where women are coming together to talk about their experiences and their own toolkit. of just getting through life.
Right.
It doesn't have to be big trauma. It can be, but I found every attendee, they're open, they're compassionate, that they're not sitting there judging anyone. And it's just like a really wholesome conversation of, well, this is how I got through it.
And that's such an important standpoint to have too, where people aren't judging other people. I think when the conversation of group therapy ever came up to me, when I was in my teen years, was just kind of like always, I don't know what anybody else is going through kind of thing, and I don't want to be judged for sharing my story. Especially growing up as a guy that didn't have those resources. It was always kind of shamed upon to have therapy. And when therapy was brought up to me, maybe like early 20s by my mom, who was my abuser, um, I was very skeptic about it because it's just like any pain that I expressed with her was always used against me. She always found a new place to stick the knife, essentially. And I took anger management when I was in like sixth, seventh grade because, parents recently divorced. My parents were always fighting, and I was a very angry kid. And I don't remember anything beneficial from anger management at all. Like there was no like counseling. There was no here's some tips to help you get through this. I just remember making a freaking collage. And that's it. That's all I remember. Um, so group therapy for me just always kind of came off as I don't want to be judged. I don't want what I'm going through to be devalued because somebody else may or may not have gone through something more traumatic than what I did.
Right. Well, and personally, like I've always disliked group therapy on like the trauma side of things because I like that requires an insane amount of vulnerability to talk about your trauma in a group of people you don't really know. And that's why my weekly series, we don't talk about the trauma. We just talk about the survival. If someone wants to get into it, like they're allowed to, but there's no expectation.
Right.
Like I don't even bring it up. It's just, okay, so what do you do to get through the hard stuff?
And it's so important to talk about the healing portion of it instead of like focusing on a traumatic matter because it's just like I feel when it comes to, just any super traumatic experience, it's just if somebody went through something similar, it's like, oh, well, at least this didn't happen to you. And I feel like those kind of like unintentional jabs always happen. Um, like for instance, in the group, I encourage people to post in there all the time. And sometimes if they don't feel comfortable, they send me a message like, hey, can I post this anonymous? I'm like, I encourage you to post it anonymously. I think it's the greatest feature ever put in a Facebook group. Because some people, like you said, it takes so much just to be vulnerable and to be able to share trauma with 1,800 strangers. I mean, I remember one time I was leaving the gym. I think this was about 4 years ago. I sat in my car for 2.5 hours and wrote something about my mom that was just kind of, whenever you leave the gym or when you're done exercising, you just kind of feel, you're decompressing, your heart rate's slowing down, and then just like everything that you just got out in that workout just kind of like goes to the front of your head and you want to get it out. I spent 2.5 hours writing something about my experience and my mom, and I blacked out. I don't remember writing any of it. When I posted it, it got so much attention, and I don't even remember like one word that I wrote. Um,
Yeah,
and
because
trauma is so hard to express to some people.
yeah, and the disassociation is really real.
Yeah,
It's also like you probably got what would be classified as triggered, and it was too intense, and like not in a bad way, but for your own safety, you slipped.
yeah. And I remember messaging my brother. I said, "Hey, I want you to read what I just posted in the group because it was something, and this is when the group was public. So, I was kind of scared to
Hmm.
post it. And then I think like shortly after, somebody's like, "Hey, I think we should make this group private because there's a lot of stories in here. I don't want somebody to take it upon themselves and, copy and paste it in some other group and claim that it's their story because I've seen that happen before and it's disgusting that people do that. But I remember after I posted it, they said you should make this group private because that's something that I don't want to get back to your mom. Um, my brother's like, holy shit, I didn't know any of that happened to you. Like, we grew up together, but he lived with my dad and I dealt with my mom. And all the experiences I had with her were very traumatic and mostly negative. So when I shared that, it was one of those things where I was hoping that somebody can get something out of it and, talk about their story. And it did inspire a lot of people to start posting. Um, but it's so hard to just have a platform and talk about anything semi-traumatic.
Yeah. Well, and that's a huge part of even why I tell my stories. Like I talk around them in the issue, but believe me, like those books are the furthest thing from graphic
Right.
because they can't be. Other ultimately, like the second book, I'm sharing the very common narrative of a kid that is sexually abused, ends up in sex work as a minor, and the addiction and other things that followed. Like, yeah, in there I was paralyzed and other things that were traumatic happened as well. But ultimately, it's the narrative of a life of a sexually abused kid, and I'm one of the few that was lucky enough to end their addiction and to still be here, like actually working my dream job and trying to make a difference in this world.
And I feel the most important part of that is saying that you overcame and you're trying to inspire and you love what you do. And obviously, like I said before, you can tell how passionate you are about the things that you talk about. And I wish there were more people like you in this society just because, I feel a lot of people that can share their trauma are strong enough, but the people that can share their trauma and create a platform off of it to share their story to help others heal is second to none, being absolutely incredible. My last episode that just dropped was with my good friend Judy. We talked about sexual assault awareness. She shared her story, and I had a handful of people message me like, "Hey, I just want to let you know that your podcast is reaching extended heights, and it's getting to a point where I'm taking a notebook out and I'm writing stuff down from your podcast, and it helps me so much." Um, and then for yourself to be able to share how traumatic the things that you went through and be able to create what you've created. Again, I can't say enough how thankful I am that people like you do exist and are helping others heal.
Well, we're all honored to still be here.
Yeah,
Maybe less so on the hard days,
right.
but we're still here.
Absolutely. Um, so for our listeners and potential future clients for yourself, what does the ancestral guidance and connection do for a client seeking the path of healing?
That would be making sure that you are connected to your culture. I don't even mind helping someone if they know their roots, doing the research and helping them connect more to what would have been tribal practices. Because I often deal with Indigenous, Black, and other people of color. Like, there are so many people in this world that are growing up without their roots. I'm one of the few that grew up off reserve that I know the indigenous side of my roots, but I don't know the Nigerian half of my Afro-Italian heritage. I don't know it at all.
Right. I
And
I grew up with both my parents are from New York, New Jersey. My mom's side of the family is Sicilian. My dad's side of the family is just kind of like all over the place. Um, the most common thing I've heard growing up and still to this day is like, "Oh, you're Sicilian? Do you know Italian?" I'm like, "No, I don't. I grew up with the most American parents that you could possibly grow up with, and I don't know anything about my culture. I don't know anything about Italy. I don't know anything about the Cayman Islands. Nothing." And I feel it's important to know your roots, like you said. It's important to know where you came from, and there's awareness there too. There's specific days that your culture might share that you don't know of, and when you discover those roots and you can appreciate that culture, I feel like there's that huge sense of belonging there.
yes, and that is often something people are missing.
Yeah,
I even myself, my face didn't make sense until I learned that I was not just Italian, but specifically Afro-Italian.
right.
Mom, why didn't you know this? Well, just because my dad was relatively light skinned. Like all I had to do was look up my last name and where they were from in Italy.
Right.
Like,
Um,
really?
I definitely feel the sense of belonging is something that very many of us are missing. Me specifically, I don't have much of a relationship with either of my parents. Um, my mom has been renamed to my birther because a mother's not supposed to be the way that she was to me growing up. Um, my dad has always been emotionally just not there. So him and I talk, we can have conversations. But
Oh,
one thing I mentioned to my therapist was I didn't have the relationship with my dad that I thought I was starting to gain back because it would always just be conversations of what Cameron's doing, what Kayla's doing, my brother and my sister, or what kind of crazy stuff that she's doing now. I don't speak to my mom, so she always comes up as a conversation sometimes. Um, and I don't really have a relationship with anybody in my family, and not having any familiarity with the culture that I'm from, like any of my Italian family, people that live in Belgium that are my family members. I don't know any of them. I don't know anything about it. Um, and there's always that giant hole inside of me that's just kind of like I wish I knew where I belonged. And, doing what I'm doing now, there's a lot of sense of belonging there because I've helped create a family in the mental health group. But what people fail to realize is okay, take away social media, like pretend that's not a thing. I'm isolated, I'm alone, I don't have any sense of belonging. I had to create that sense of belonging in that group. And what you're
yeah.
doing is helping people find those roots and their family tree and help them express their culture and what they're missing in their life. So I think that's pretty cool too.
Well, and it's really the best part of combining the different aspects of traditional medicine and that healing with social work and the okay resources. You need to feel belonging and you know all of this. Let's go find it.
Absolutely. And when you're able to do that research and you're able to find those tools to do so, it's like, oh, cool. My great grandfather was this. Like, I know my grandpa was in the Korean War, but that's really all. That's all that I know. I don't know anything about his family or where he came from. I know my grandma came from Italy, but that's all I know. I don't know anything about their culture or nothing. And my parents never uh, went out of their way to say, hey, you have parents or grandparents from here, and we celebrate these specific holidays or these specific days. Like, I think the most I got out of an Italian culture was my great aunt, who's very Sicilian, um, and had a gigantic dinner every time that we came over. Um, but that wasn't very, very common either. It was just like once in a while we'll go.
Yeah. See, and that's a thing I think we're missing the most in North America because ultimately, like even though it's two separate countries, we're both in melting pots.
Absolutely.
And yes, I'm fortunate that Indigenous culture is being re-embraced in Canada, but I'm unless I want to go hang out with a bunch of Italian immigrants in my city
Right.
who I don't know and have
Right.
no link to, I or go to a fancy Italian restaurant, like I'm not getting any link to my Afro-Italian heritage.
Right.
Like,
Is Alberta anywhere near like the French portion of Canada? Like, obviously, I don't know uh
no.
Canada very well.
Um, it's your second province in from the west coast. Our most French areas, well, while there are actually a few small French communities in Alberta, I would say most of it is very English and actually Americanized.
Okay.
But they jokingly call Alberta Canada's Texas. Judging from my face, you can understand it's not exactly a compliment.
Right, right. Completely fair. You're right. So I like to ask all my guests this, since we're close to wrapping up. If you could change one thing in the mental health community, what would it be?
It would be that every professional, although we all have our hourly rate, everyone functioned on a sliding scale, at least at a percentage of the time. Because I myself, most people that are high risk don't have the jobs or the stability in their life to pay for an entire counseling hour.
Absolutely.
Like of my full rate, they might be good for 15 minutes of that. But in reality, I can help more people if I function on a sliding scale, and I'm happy to because ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to give people grace. And those in trauma need the grace the most.
Couldn't agree more. Um, we have of course have those programs that offer free therapy and everything, right? And I've had friends who have gone to therapists that are free. Um, and all of them have been almost all negative. It's just kind of like they don't really help. It's just always kind of like pushing me away, kind of feeling. And I'm like, well, I hate saying to a situation like that, but you get what you pay for. It's they're not being paid to help people. They're being paid in a program that's probably super underpaying them.
And exactly. And I even myself, as a poor teen, in those free government programs, I had one counselor that actually to this day made an impact and changed my life.
Right.
The rest of them were basically write-offs. They didn't listen, they weren't helpful, they didn't do like the accountability or the action steps to change the experience or the feeling.
Right. Um, what would be your best advice to anybody who's seeking out therapy?
Try try to not give up before you find your best fit because finding a therapist, counselor, whatever you want to call them, it might take a while. You might not get the right one until more than five tries.
Yeah. I've definitely had a handful of friends who have gone through 4 or 5 therapists and then finally gave up. And I think the most important part of finding a therapist is asking questions. Not just going there blindly and just not knowing what to expect. Because like we mentioned earlier, therapy takes work inside and outside that room, and you can't just go in there and be like, "Oh well, I'm here for therapy. How can you help me?" It's like, no, how can they help you? Uh, to a
And
point of what do they cover? Can they prescribe medicine if I need it? What types of therapy do you use? And I think that's the most important part too, because not everybody can, function off of just regular cognitive therapy.
exactly. And also, like, stand your ground.
Yeah.
You say you're experiencing grief or anger or anxiety or depression, and you lay out the scenario, and the counselor says, so what I'm hearing is the exact opposite of what you just said. Don't nod, don't agree, reiterate yourself until
Yeah.
they actually understand. Because sometimes it's not that they're listening, sometimes it's just a miscommunication in the words you used to describe. And I know that that is incredibly frustrating, but it's the self-advocacy.
Yeah.
This is what I'm experiencing. This is what I need help with. What you just heard is not what I'm experiencing and not what I need help with. Let's try again.
I remember my friend Victoria when she was going into therapy for the first time. It was actually paid therapist, and she was experiencing therapy for the first time. And I told her, I said, make sure you're asking those questions. Therapy is not just for venting. And again, like I said, that's a huge misconception about therapy. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is for venting, but it's so much more than that. You have to express what your goals are with therapy. You can't just go to therapy for 5 years and nothing changes. If you're just going there for venting, nothing's gonna change in your life. It's just
Oh,
you might as well call up your best friend and do the same thing.
that's what I was just gonna say. I'm like, well, you might as well just sit around with your friends and participate in a maladaptive behavior while having air quote social hour.
Right. And when I started going to therapy, I remember one of my friends was so against it. He was just like, "Oh, well, why don't you just call me? You could save money." I said, "Dude, I've known you for 10 plus years, and anything that I were to tell you, I know exactly how the conversation would go. Oh, well, your life may not be that bad, or, whatever about my life. This therapist doesn't know all the ins and outs of my relationships and my friendships with people. It's an unbiased opinion, and they're there to help you heal. They're not just there to hear you vent."
Right.
And it took a while for me to like drill that in the back of his head, and unfortunately we don't talk anymore. But um it just kind of, a lot of people that are not for therapy or just don't think they need therapy, always just, you could just call me, you don't need to go to therapy and save money. It's like it doesn't work that way, but sorry.
Yeah.
So at the end of every podcast, and this being a suicide prevention month, I found a quote just to read on that topic. Before I read mine, did you have any quotes that you live by or wanted to read to our listeners before we close up today?
I don't think so. And
Okay.
mostly because I cannot come up with one.
Yeah, yeah, no worries at all. So I found a quote from the Foundation to Write Love in Her Arms. If you guys are not familiar with this group, I highly recommend you follow them. They are absolutely brilliant. Probably one of my favorite foundations that we have here. I've had conversations with them, and they help me inspire the platform that I'm on today. So it reads, "It's okay to be scared of what lies ahead. You are not alone in feeling this way, nor are you a burden for it. No matter how much you believe you are no matter how much you are made to believe otherwise." Like I said, this month for me is extremely important, and I am absolutely grateful that you came on today. So thank you so much again, Reese, for being on today.
It was an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And for all our listeners, again, I'll mention this all month. If you need help, please don't hesitate to either reach out to me or, dial 988, which is the crisis hotline, just in case you need it. If you're not comfortable calling it, you can reach out to me. I will sit on the phone with you to call them, and, there's no pressure. And for everybody else, Be well, and as always, be gentle with yourselves.